treat cause, not correlation. Every time we start a program to treat a correlation, which is what crime is, to an underlying cause, all we do is exacerbate the problem. If you want to make crime go down, let's talk about the causes of crime. And there are two primary causes of crime: single parent families and the drug war. Let me talk about the drug war. By legalizing drugs, what we do is we drop the cost so low that theft plummets. And I know that will happen because Portugal is the closest thing in the world to a country that has legalized everything. And Lisbon is the safest major city in the world, and Portugal is the safest industrialized nation in the world.
Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. I am your host, Jared Blonian, here to be joined today by Herb Kay with the 1964 plan. Herb, how's it going? And thanks for joining us.
Super, and it's a pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's unique. We're going to talk about some interesting stuff today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the 1964 plan?
I have a very long and unique resume. So in rough order, and I'll go through this very fast. I've been a sailor, a Russian linguist at the National Security Agency, an analyst. I was a submariner, I should say, a pilot, a CEO, an entrepreneur. I wrote a bestseller in 1999, a real estate developer, a manufacturer, a venture capitalist, a venture lender, and an inmate in the Arizona prison system, which is why I formed and by the way, guilty is, I never get into the weaseling that most people do trying to justify what they've done. I was developing real estate in Mexico in 2008. I speak Spanish as well. As you know, the real estate market collapsed, and I crossed the line trying to save the company when I should have just bankrupted it, and that's how I ended up where I did. But as a result, and I was guilty. I don't want to get into trying to justify or mitigating or anything like that. But I did get a very unique perspective on a group of people that otherwise it's unusual for anyone to be as stupid as me to go from the very top and the very bottom. So I try to use that stupidity and turn it into something positive, and that's the 1964 plan, which is a plan basically to make our streets safe again like they were in 1964.
So basically, you have a wide experience. You know, you've been in the military, you've been around the world, presumably.
Oh, I left a lot out. A paid speaker. I was a talking head on CNBC, CBS, ABC, and NBC. I've done a lot of different things. But anyway, I don't mean to cut you off, Jared. Party on.
Yeah, no. And so truly kind of, basically a little bit about kind of your concept. Can you kind of give us a little background on the 1964 plan, how you came up with it and what does it mean?
Well, in 1964, I'm not trying to turn the clock back, although I'm obviously a boomer. But in 1964, when I was 7 years old, my best friend and I could go to downtown Pittsburgh on a streetcar, which is what we called light rail, by ourselves with nothing more in our pocket than our paper route money and a dime to call our mothers if we were going to be late. Nobody snatched children. It was a multiracial city. The crime just didn't exist. You could leave the keys in your car. It was an entirely different world. In 1964, I picked that year because that's the year that we passed what I believe to be the most important piece of legislation of the last century, which is the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act made all discrimination illegal from that point forward. Not to say that there isn't still discrimination. That's not my argument. It's just illegal. And that's a good thing. So, and at that point, the United States was at its apogee. Everything was great. And then we proceeded to make total crap out of it, to the point where cities in California, in particular, San Francisco, Los Angeles, the homeless issue, the crime issue, the drug issue, the 1964 plan addresses all of those things. And it's, by the way, it's a 501c3 nonprofit, which means we are non-political. It doesn't matter to me whether you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. It means nothing at all. I'm here to fix the plan, a problem, not, obviously as an ex-felon, I'm not running for office.
And what's interesting is 1964 you could easily afford a house. Things were a lot more affordable, easier access to degrees and things like that. Here that's something in California we're struggling with: housing affordability, housing availability. What in your plan kind of deals with housing and kind of how to make it affordable and accessible?
The plan deals with the whole economy and the whole system in general. We have to get the government out of the business of trying to manipulate markets. In order for any government, whether it's California's government or the federal government or any other government, they would have to be omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. And it's no one has the knowledge base to control markets. That's That's the fallacy of all the politicians. They think they can control. Right now, for example, they're debating what to do about AI. Does anyone really think that anybody alive right now really truly understands AI besides the developers? And certainly not some 80-year-old state senator in Sacramento. You know what I mean? It's just they
Yeah.
get involved in things they don't know what they're talking about, and then they regulate them. Housing is expensive in California because of zoning. You can't. What happens is when you increase zoning to try to keep people like isolate areas of, like, for example, poor people, or provide low income housing, and then at the same time vilify landlords, which is what politicians do to get votes. It's easy. It's easy to create a scapegoat for your own mistakes, which is what all politicians do, regardless of party. So then what happens is every decent landlord abandons, and you're left with slumlords. So you get the worst of both worlds. Every single time, for example, low income housing has been tried, not just in California, but nationwide, it's been a disaster for exactly that reason. There are no examples of any successful low income housing. The best thing that could be done is loosen up zoning, allow landlords to develop, and supply and demand. You'll get much more supply, and prices will begin to sink. Plus, of course, there's inflation, which California can't control. That's the federal government printing more money than they should be. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And that's why we're in inflation now, which, of course, California can't control. What it can control is its zoning, and it's insane. San Francisco, in particular, is insane.
It's interesting. It seems like, we talk about pre 2020, like it was a different era, different trying. It was 3 years, and the society's completely changed. Kind of what's your view of this post COVID war, and kind of how does that fit in your 1964 plan? How has that evolved your thinking, kind of seeing this pandemic through?
The pandemic is a perfect example of grotesque overreaction by the globe. By the globe, okay. And by the way, I can prove what I'm about to say. In March of 2020, I wrote a piece in my Substack, which is attached to the website 1960 the1964plan.org. Anyone can go there. My white papers are free, and there are links to everything in my Substack and things I've done. In March of 2020, I said, "Here's what we know about COVID. It doesn't kill children." Turned out to be true. It mostly kills people that are over 65 with serious health problems. That's absolutely true. And what we should do about it is nothing. Simply inform people. Of course, the project to get the vaccines was a good idea, but the only people who truly, truly needed to get the vaccines, and it would have avoided so much nightmarish argument that still goes on, is if it was given to the people that are truly at risk. People like me. I'm 66 years old. I took the vaccine. I'm vaccinated. But I would. Is my 14-year-old grandson? No, completely unnecessary. Why? So, having said that, and of course, there was so much misinformation, not just on the part of the United States, but globally. The only country that handled it well was Sweden, really. Well, Sweden and Norway, a couple of U.S. states. But what it did is they created an artificial global depression. They shut down the world economy. This is where it gets into really what affects California and everybody else. And then through an enormous amount of fiat currency, which means money with nothing behind it. There's not enough gold in Fort Knox to cover the amount of money that we have issued, and we issued an enormous amount of money to give the illusion that we hadn't caused an intentional man-made global depression, which is exactly what happened. We took production to nothing. We picked out industries that were favored, some were critical, some were non-critical, completely random. No one really understood what was going on. It was acting without thought. And in the process, now they've started up the world economy, and we are on the precipice. And I have a long financial background. I don't want to bore people with it in the limited time we have, but we're about to have a global depression of such scale that it's going to make the Great Depression seem like a happy memory. And then the issues are going to go from what everyone's worried about today, which are going to seem peripheral, to how do I make ends meet and how do I eat? And unfortunately, I don't think that it can be avoided, and I don't think it matters one bit who's elected president or governor or in the state legislature. It's too late.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. A lot of politics is reacting to what's happening, instead of enacting
Well,
things that help
you
you
know,
avoid things, right?
what most people, we're all a victim of public schooling, those of us who went to public school. And one of the huge misconceptions of every American is that we're a democracy. We are not a democracy. We were never a democracy. Read the Constitution. You will not find the word democracy even once. It's simply not mentioned. We are a republic. And as the reason we were set up as a republic is because democracy is a utopian idea put forth by Plato that every time it's been tried has been a disaster because it's mob rule. majority rule is not a good thing. What made America special was the Bill of Rights that protected the rights of the individual. Well, we've thrown away those things anytime they're inconvenient and created a super state doing things that the founders tried to prevent. And they set up some things to prevent that. One of the things they did to prevent it was to require that a voter had to own property. We did away with that with the 19th Amendment. There was also a rule that said senators were not directly elected. The idea was we copied our government after England's government. So we were trying to copy the House of Lords without establishing a royalty. And how senators were selected, therefore, was the state legislatures would select the senators, not direct election by the voters. That would eliminate the need to constantly lie, which, of course, all politicians do constantly to get votes. And then they pretend like they did. It's the art of lying. I call them obsequious, glad-handing weasels, and I'm toning down what I usually say about them. So, and the bottom line is, by taking away that, we turned the Senate into just another house. So they threw out, the whole idea was to slow things down. The 1964 plan is based on three philosophies combined. Stoicism, which has four pillars, which is courage, justice, wisdom, and moderation. Then it's based on objectivism, which is there is such a thing as objective reality. Objective reality is defined as anything that doesn't require belief to be true. So many things that we think are true only because we believe them. They're not verifiably true, therefore they are not objectively real. Therefore, we should not act on them without understanding what we're dealing with. And the third is Taoism, spelled T-A-O, not D-A-O, but people typically mispronounce it. Taoism was founded by a man named Lao Tzu 600 years before Christ. And the central tenet of Taoism is, and I'm going to rewrite it into English because it's so complicated in Chinese. By the way, I was a linguist too before I did all of this stuff. Taoism says 99.99999% of the time, the best thing to do about any problem you confront is nothing. Simply allow organically the problem to work out. We, of course, do not ever do that. We act before we think, and then we have all these unintended consequences. Like, for example, the housing, we were talking before we went on the air. Why is housing expensive in California? Because politicians have zoned and beat up on landlords and beat up on tenants and tried to create all kinds of programs to help, none of which they thought about for 30 seconds, all of which have caused unintended consequences. And, I can go on and on.
Yeah, it's interesting. What in 1964, I'm sure a house was under 50 grand. You could probably get a 4 years.
We bought my family. Now I didn't, but I was aware of what we paid for it. My father made $20,000 a year, which in 1964 was big money. My mother didn't have to work. She could if she wanted to, but she didn't want to because why not? We had a 3-story stone Tudor house with a full finished basement that we bought for $46,000. Out of sheer just coincidence, I went to a wedding not long ago in the same township where I grew up. The house happened to be for sale for $1.9 million. The same exact house. That's insane. Okay? Insane. And yet that's what we've done.
And, it's interesting, through COVID, what the money supply is quadrupled. Kind of parallels back to what you're talking about after 1964. Nixon comes in, Vietnam War.
Oh, well, the dumbest thing Nixon ever did, he did two incredibly stupid things. The first thing he did was take us off the gold standard, which is why we're sitting here in an inflationary condition today. And the second thing he did was start the drug war. And if you want to know why San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego and Sacramento and the whole country has an enormous urban crime problem, it's the drug war primarily. The drug war and, of course, the destruction of the nuclear family by welfare, but that's another discussion. So the drug war was lost when I was in prison. This is where I got a very unique perspective. And there's a white paper on drug legalization at my website. I'm in favor of total legalization. All drugs should be legal. That is not to say that drugs are good, drugs are bad. But what we're doing is we're incarcerating addicts and we're putting them into a sea of despair and self-loathing where they're never going to escape for simply being sad people. What people don't, yes, drugs are bad. Drugs are bad. But 9 out of 10 of us can use any drug without getting addicted. That's never talked about like grown-ups. Alcohol is by far the most destructive drug, but 9 out of 10 of us could have a drink every day and not be alcoholics. But there is a 10% of the population that addiction, from my observation, at least in prison, is the unprescribed medication of self-loathing. These people, just longevity isn't their goal. So the question is, why are we incarcerating people who have, who, for example, are born into homes without a father, have no hope of achievement, go to horrible public schools, are held down by a system that subsidizes not working. The entire welfare system is set up to subsidize anything you subsidize, you get more of. When you give people money without doing anything for it, but procreating, you're going to get a lot of babies and no work. And that's what's created the culture. 82%, for example, of Black children today are born into single parent families. It is therefore not a coincidence that 55% of all crime is committed by Black people, who only make up 13% of the population. That's why the prison population is so overwhelmingly Black. Now, the politicians will, the left will blame the right and the right will blame the left, and they're both full of crap. The drug war should have never started, and we should not be subsidizing single parent families, which we do. And I could go on, but of course we have limited time, and I could go on and on, obviously. So ask me more questions.
Yeah. So, as you stated, kind of you went into prison, and kind of it's changed your perspective on a lot of things. Can you tell us kind of what you learned while in prison, and kind of why that changed kind of some of your thoughts on some of these issues?
When I went into, first of all, I was an unusual inmate, not only because I was wealthy before this whole disaster hit the fan, but also because I'm Jewish. And the prisons are segregated. Now, they're not segregated by the administration, they're segregated by the inmates themselves. The races are very tribalized in prison, and they're led by various gangs. The whites are led by the Aryan Brotherhood and the skinheads. They hate Jews. As a result of that, I rolled black. Okay. And when I say rolled, in prison, you have to basically affiliate yourself with a group. I wasn't going to affiliate myself with a bunch of neo Nazis. So I affiliated myself with the Black population. But I also speak fairly fluent Spanish because I did business in Mexico for years. So I had a very close relationship with the Chicanos and the Paisas, which are two different groups. The Chicanos are the Mexican Americans, or the Americans who happen to be Mexican. I hate hyphenating things and putting a country of origin before the nation. They're Americans who happen to be Mexican. The Paisas are foreign nationals in American prisons, and they are the cartel guys. And for example, in the last prison that I was in Kingman, Arizona, $3.5 million a year of drugs were coming in, and they were coming in through the corrections officers, not up people's rear ends and not up, women's vaginas when they come in to visit their boyfriends, which is the myth. The reality is the entire system is corrupted. And I learned from those guys, the cartel guys, who I knew extremely well, because frankly, they were the most interesting guys in prison. I learned how drugs are smuggled, how they're brought into the prison. They asked me to launder money for them, which I turned down because, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. I wasn't going to do that again. But I became very informed on how crime really works and how stupid and pointless the system is as it is. And then the other thing I noticed is that virtually every boy I met, and I was a yard dad. So these are lost boys by and large. And I'm sure this is true in women's prisons as lost girls, but obviously I wasn't exposed to a women's prison. I say lost boys because none of them have a father and all of them really want one. And so they gravitated towards me. I became a yard dad. I had an unending stream of young men coming to see me and asking advice. I know that runs against the picture that's in movies, but do not confuse movies with reality. Okay, no one was getting raped in prison. That's a repetitive myth, and mostly these boys. There was a lot of, by the way, homosexual sex, but it was very in the open, and it was voluntary. There's plenty of people to play with each other in the shower stalls. Having said that, and no one cared. I mean, interestingly, the inmates didn't care. Whatever makes you happy, be happy. So, in fact, just as a side note, the prettiest girl on the yard was a guy who was a transsexual, and he was so pretty you had to almost look away because you didn't want to stare at a guy who looked like a girl when it was kind of, anyway. He was beautiful in a weird way. And anyway, having said all that, I learned a lot about crime, and I learned how pointless and how stupid our prison system is. That also needs massive reformation. And because of my unique perspective, I wrote the 1964 plan. And I put all of this, by the way, into free white papers that are at the website, the 1964plan.org.
It's interesting. California in 2012, we had probably, I think, the most incarcerated population in the world. maybe still do per
The
capita.
United States does, by the way. But
Um,
our country is 4% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prison population. We incarcerate more people in the United States as a percentage of our population than China, Russia, and North Korea combined. That is a national disgrace that's never spoken of because on the right, all they want to do is lock people up, which all that does is create these inmates. It's a lifestyle. They're doing life on the installment plan. They don't give one rat's ass if they have to do a few years here and there. They, if anything, it gives them a place to live for a while in 3 squares a day, and they can plan their next crime. This is just the right is out of their mind. And on the left, the solution is not turn them loose. Okay, that's idiotic. Okay, there has to be a better system, and there is, and I put it in the 1964 plan.
Yeah, so that is the question. Kind of, can you share with us, what's in your plan? This is something we're dealing with in California right now. We've let tons of inmates out. We're dealing with tons of crime, waves of shoplifting, drugs, etc. And people are saying, "Oh, we need to put more people in jail." The cops are saying we can't do anything because the DAs won't prosecute. And so basically, we're left with a
Well, they're
lot of
both wrong. I mean,
lawlessness on
you
both
want to
sides.
treat cause, not correlation. Every time we start a program to treat a correlation, which is what crime is, to an underlying cause, all we do is exacerbate the problem. If you want to make crime go down, let's talk about the causes of crime. And there are two primary causes of crime: single parent families and the drug war. Now, single parent families, that's a long discussion. And that's because we have a limited time, read that in the white paper. Let me talk about the drug war. If drugs were legal, for example, there's no patentable formula for heroin. Heroin's been around for generations. Heroin today, and there was a study by Yale University, which I footnote in my white paper, that pointed out that at 5% of its current street cost, any producer would have a 100% profit margin. That means that if heroin were legal, I'm just using that as one example, an addict could feed their habit for $20 a week. They wouldn't have to break into anybody's house. They wouldn't, and they don't want to. I know them up close and firsthand. They steal because it's their only alternative to support their habit. And they're not going to get talked out of it. Telling them that drugs are bad, you might as well talk to the wall. These are people who are so intensely self loathing that all they're trying to do is get through the day. Longevity is not their goal. They have no expectation of living past their 40s. And the question has to be asked: who are we to judge people born into horrendous situations where in the real world, the objective reality, their life is not going to get better. So by legalizing drugs, what we do is we drop the cost so low that theft plummets. And I know that will happen because Portugal is the closest thing in the world to a country that has legalized everything. And Lisbon is the safest major city in the world. And Portugal is the safest industrialized nation in the world. And they didn't even go as far as I would go. They decriminalized. And to me, decriminalization is just a code word for replacing the cartels with bureaucracy. I would go for, in my world, I think an addict should be able to walk into Walgreens and buy its drug. That would also eliminate all the theft from families. Anyone who's had an addict in their family has had things disappear, jewelry disappear, TVs disappear, cars get sold out from under them. I mean, I'm laughing because it's just such a sad story. What else can you do? That would all stop because it would become extremely inexpensive to deal with addiction. And by ending the drug war, which we've spent $1 trillion on since Nixon announced it in 1971, that moron. By the way, did you see my shirt? Stop electing morons. That's my political statement. Stop electing morons.
We can't avoid it.
I know. Well, that's because
Only
politics have
morons
become
run.
so ugly. But
Yeah.
that's why I purposely stay away from politics. It's disgustingly filthy, and we're about to have such a crash that we have a chance to reform things. But anyway, so where was it? So in drug legalization, we would have trillions of dollars available, for example, that we're now blowing on a hopeless. In fact, you want me to tell you how most drugs and most people are smuggled into the United States, and it's not across the Rio Grande River. Do you want me to tell you why the wall is stupid and why every policy they're doing is stupid, stupid, stupid? Would you like to know that?
Yeah, that's a big topic right now, immigration, right?
Yeah, there are thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of tunnels underneath every border city into the United States. Now, they don't dig these tunnels out in the middle of nowhere like in the movie Sicario, which, by the way, was a great movie and one of my very favorites. But the tunnel was out in the middle of nowhere. That's never true. It's much easier to hide a tree in a forest than out in the middle of nowhere. So there are thousands of tunnels in Nogales, Mexico to Nogales, Arizona, from Tijuana into San Diego, from Juarez into El Paso, and right down the line, thousands of them. And there are Mexican families who, like the families of coal miners, are tunnelers. This is what they do. They work for the cartels. They raise their children to tunnel, and they dig these tunnels, and they use each of them twice before they rest them for 6 months. Now they rest them for 6 months because they assume that the people and drugs that are going through it sooner or later are going to rat out the tunnel. Which is why when they occasionally find a tunnel, when you see it in the press, it's always they never find anything in it because the cartel is too smart to keep using the same one. They have so many others and they rotate them. So the wall is useless. And the people crossing the Rio Grande are just a tiny, those are the dummies. The people coming with the cartels are going under the border and they're here and they're not going to be stopped. Further, the Border Patrol is completely infiltrated by the cartels. That's a fact. They have been raising children, particularly in Latino American families, to grow up and join the Border Patrol when they become of age and are now working in the Border Patrol, and it's completely infiltrated. Now, I'm sure the director of the Border Patrol would stand on a stack of Bibles and say that's not true. Bullshit, pardon my language. I'm telling you firsthand, I didn't hear about it. I know the cartel guys. It's infiltrated. So the drug war has corrupted institutions that shouldn't be. End it. It's stupid. We're not going to win it. Drugs are bad. Let's take the $1 trillion and devote it to housing the homeless and treating people who want to be treated, and stop and drop crime to where it's an afterthought.
What were some of the key milestones and challenges you faced kind of in gathering this plan?
That's an interesting question that I've never been asked before, so I actually have to think about it for a second. Well, first of all, of course, was dealing with the Nazis. What I had to do eventually is I had to beat up a Nazi, which I call them Nazis. They call themselves Aryan Brothers, but that's what they have, swastikas all over them. They're not hard to find. You can always tell what gang anyone belongs to by their ink. I even have prison ink. You want to see it? How do you like that? I did that just to tell the Nazis to go, with themselves. I did it on purpose. Oh, gee, yeah. When I went to prison, I thought that meant old guy. But, then I figured out it was original gangster. And the kids loved me, right?
Yeah.
And I had that put on by a kid whose prison handle was Flacco, who lived over the wall from me where my prison house was, and was actually a professional tattoo artist on the outside. It's ingenious what they do in prison with almost nothing. But anyway, that's a digression. So the challenges were, the only way that I could deal with the Nazis was basically to beat the crap out of the one that was giving me the most trouble. And I did that by blindsiding them because I'm an old man and I couldn't possibly win a fair fight. But there's no such thing as a fair fight. And once they were clear that I wasn't going to be messed with, they left me alone. Then became an issue of just gaining the trust. And I gained the trust of all those young men because I always told them the truth. And instead of telling them what they wanted to hear, like I've sat in a room full of black guys and told them all this whining and victimhood isn't going to work. I've told them right to their face, look, guys, I'm a Jew. We're the most persecuted people in history. It's indisputable. We've been slaughtered by every civilization for thousands of years. We have somehow come through, and how we did it, and this is what I used to tell black guys. It got to the point, by the way, what I'm about to say. Can I use a bad word on the podcast?
Yeah, go ahead.
A really bad word, like the F word?
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to use the F word just once. Instead of complaining about white privilege and all this bullshit, by the way, which doesn't exist because the largest earning group in the United States are Asians, not white people. And if whites were a racist group and organized to hold down the minorities, Asians would not be the leading. Not only are they leading, they're leading by like double what the average per capita income is of white people. And that's because their families are intact and they're too smart to let them fall apart. But anyway, that's a digression. I used to tell them, you know what Jews do when we're confronted with a problem, just like when I was in prison, this kind of answers your question. We find a way and fuck them. And that's what I told them. Find a way and fuck them. You're not going to, if someone doesn't like a black, racism is a thought crime. Painting end racism in the end zone of some football game does nothing. I guess it makes everybody feel good, but discrimination is an action. Racism is a thought. You can prosecute people who discriminate, but you can't do anything about racists other than ignore them. So, for example, in California, Jews control the motion picture industry. There's no point in even arguing that. We both know that's true. The motion picture industry is dominated by Jews. The big studios, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Louis Mayer was a Jew, right? I can go down the list. They were all Jews. Why? Because we invented the industry at the turn of the last century. Why did we invent the industry? Because we were shut out of everything else because they wouldn't let the Jews in. So we just invented a new industry. We found a way and fuck them. That's how we got in control of the entertainment industry. And so I used to tell the black kids, stop fooling around. Just start your own businesses, start your own future, build your own new base. Stop looking for someone to bail out what isn't going to be bailed out, and isn't even an objective reality. Most of these kids suffer from being so propagandized by their own parents and culture for so long to believe that they're victims that they don't feel the wherewithal to make the effort. We have to stop feeding the victimhood train, regardless of who we're talking about. People, that's going to get you nowhere. Whining and complaining and begging and pointing fingers and accusing. I guess if it makes you feel good, party on, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. It's interesting. It seems like the biggest issue in California right now is homelessness.
Yes.
And, homeless have been around for a long time. In
And the
'08,
prisons are
we
used
had
as homeless shelters. Yeah.
we had the big recession, and it seems like since COVID, there just has been an explosion of homeless, and we're seeing tents popping up everywhere, and we're throwing money at it. We have no answers. Kind of, what is
Well,
the
I have
answer?
an answer. I have an answer. So, number one, end the drug war, because my answer calls for money, and money has to come from somewhere, and we're already borrowing 50% of the money we're spending, which is one of the huge reasons we're going to be in a horrible situation in about 30 seconds. So, by ending the drug war, we free up $1 trillion that we're already spending, and now we can devote it to solve some of these problems. So, now, and when I say solve, Thomas Sowell, who's my favorite living economist, says there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So what I'm about to tell you is a different trade-off. It's not going to be perfect. It's just much better than what we're doing now. There's never going to be 100% no homelessness. I live with a lot of homeless guys, and let me tell you, a lot of them prefer to be homeless. And I know that's never talked about, but they don't like the rules. They don't want to go to the homeless shelter and be told they can't do their heroin if they're going to get fed, and so they remain on the street. It's no more complicated than that. So homeless generally fall into two categories: the mentally ill and the addicted. Okay, that's a broad generalization, but that's 99% of the homeless population is either mentally ill or addicted. Now, for the mentally ill, it's a disgrace that the richest country in the history of the world has, on any given night, 300,000 or 400,000 people living on the streets with schizophrenia and untreated mental illness. So, with the money that we're not pissing away on the drug war, we could build phenomenally nice homes. And I don't mean asylums. I don't mean lock them up and be nuts. I mean nice, comfortable facilities where they can be taken, and they should be given their drug of choice. Stop denying them what they want. If they want to do heroin, let them do heroin. The reason that they do drugs, by the way, is they don't like the way that the medications for example, schizophrenia make them feel. Okay, that they take, I think it's called, starts with an L, I forget what it is. Anyway, it makes them feel dead. So that what they do is they self-medicate with heroin, crack, meth, you name it. Let them have it. Let them have it in a quiet, safe environment. Offer them rehab if they want it. Offer them psych meds if they want it. But if they don't, let them live their lives. They're not going to get better. We don't know how to cure schizophrenia. We don't know how to cure virtually any mental illness. We just don't. So I just say make them comfortable and off the streets where they're not crapping on your front doorstep, because they can also become very violent and very irritated. I saw that in prison a lot. But we're using our prisons now as homeless shelters, which is insane. The other half are addicts. And when I say addicts, I don't mean addicts like, for example, people watching us right now, among them are going to be a lot of functional addicts, particularly functional alcoholics. We all know functional alcoholics, people who are clearly alcoholic, but otherwise they have families, they go to work every day, they get stuff done. They're just alcoholics. I'm sure you know people like that, don't you, Jarrett, that are functional alcoholics? Okay. Well, there are functional heroin addicts. I know that is in the face of the popular narrative, but it's true. It's an objective reality. You don't have to believe it. It's true. It's just as simple as that. So for those people, I say we build outside the city limits, okay, where it's not going to offend anybody, or in an industrial area. Like, for example, in Los Angeles, let's pick Irvine, which is a heavily industrialized area, right? You've been to LA, you know.
Yep.
So in Irvine, just pick a great big parking lot that's not being used for anything and build a tiny house village, not tents, tiny houses. You know what I'm talking about? These small houses are basically studio apartments, and give them the pride of ownership. That is their tiny house. Now, one of the myths about the homeless is that they're dirty. In prison, they were almost weirdly, fastidiously clean. In fact, the guy that I hired in prison for 6 jars of peanut butter a month to clean my prison house was a homeless guy, and he was the cleanest guy you ever met. He did my laundry, he folded it, he was the sweetest guy in the world. they're dirty because they live on the street and they don't want to go to the shelter, be denied their drugs. And so the filth is a byproduct of the system. On their own, they'll keep the house clean, they'll be fine. I say, let them go there, give them for free their drug of choice. If they want to sit in their house, we've been using heroin. Wyatt Earp's wife was addicted to opium, for Christ's sake. There was nothing unusual about it. We've just decided for some moralistic reason that alcohol is good, heroin is bad. When if you withdraw from heroin, and I've seen it 1,000 times, I can tell you this, you have about 24 hours of misery and then you're over it. With alcohol, you have to be on IV because you'll die from the withdrawal when you're a serious alcoholic. So it's a much more dangerous drug. It kills. Collectively, there were 50,000 opiate deaths in the United States last year. There were over 300,000 alcohol-related deaths. I mean, this is just an arbitrary decision that society has made. Let these people go. And a lot of them, by the way, are screaming alcoholics. If they want their can of malt liquor, give it to them. Let them go into their house, live a quiet life, not a prison. They can come and go as they please, but they get free food, they get free drugs, they have a safe place to live, a private place to poop, basically, their own bathroom, their own bed, their own pride of ownership, and let it be a village of people who are addicted. And then have available to them, because we have plenty of money, on site social workers and treatment for those, that's tiny percentage that want to get out of it, and always have that available to them. But we need to get a sense of reality here. The vast majority of these people are not looking to get better. They're looking to trudge through a life. They come from backgrounds. I used to listen to the stories of what happened. Lots of them were pimped out by their parents, sold for drugs, beaten, whipped, incest. I mean, it just goes on. And the incidence of incest among these people is just, it's mind-boggling. These people are permanently broken. Let's treat them as human beings who are permanently broken and let them ride out their lives in a place where they're not going to get in the way of other people who are living their lives in a more traditional way. And it's a win-win. It's a win-win.
Yeah. It's often said, experience shapes your perspective on issues. Since releasing the plan, have you gotten feedback, and has that kind of, shaped kind of your thoughts or changed any of your stances on some of the things you've released?
Well, every time I get yelled at, I know it's a good plan. That's why it's a plan and not propaganda. I've gotten lots of feedback. I've had people say you're out of your mind. I mean, every time I talk to a Republican, all they do is give me a lecture on how bad drugs are. Yeah, they're bad. I get it. They're immoral. Okay. But that doesn't matter. Anytime that you try to make illegal something where there's demand, you're going to create a black market. And that black market has ruined our country. But the fact that they don't like it tells me that was a good part of the plan. Then when I talk about ending welfare at the federal level, my plan is to devolve it to the states. California is not the same as Wyoming, and Wyoming is not the same as Florida, and Florida is not the same as New York State. They're all demographically different. The reason that a welfare state works in Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, where they're not socialist, but they do have welfare states that are successful, is because they have tiny populations. The largest Scandinavian country is 10 million people. That's Sweden, which is smaller than Los Angeles by itself. And they're racially and culturally homogeneous. They're all Swedes. So you can design a plan for that population. Well, our states are like 50 individual little countries that trade freely between each other. Okay, so let the governors and the legislatures design the welfare program for the state. And what will control the cost is states are not allowed to print money. So they'll have to make responsible judgments about what works and what doesn't, instead of printing up money and throwing at it, causing all kinds of side effects for one-size-fits-all solutions that don't work. I'm not against a safety net. I just think the safety net. Now, the reason, by the way, isn't because, they always say, well, if we don't do it at the federal level, they'll let their people die. That's not why. It's because special interests only want to lobby one place for their graft. If they had to lobby 50 state legislatures, 50 governors, and the thousands of state legislators, it would be too difficult. It's much easier to get graft and become part of the state to lobby in Washington than it is to lobby in Sacramento and Phoenix and Harrisburg. And you know what I'm saying? It's right. Just let the states run their welfare plans and let them design it for the state, and they'll do a much better job.
Yeah. Earlier you're kind of alluding to, we're going to face some tough times as a civilization. Kind of, here we are coming into an election year, kind of facing, a deja vu from 4 years prior. Kind of, what do you see in our near future?
340 million people, and we're down to a guy that's senile and a screaming narcissist. It's amazing to me. But anyway, and they, they're obviously what they are, but their own people, this is why I just hate politics. It doesn't matter who's elected. What's happened is, and again, I wrote about this. I hate to say that I told you so, but I was really, and I got a lot of lip when I said it. In 2014, when Barack Obama took office, he said that the zero interest rates that began under George Bush would only continue for another 6 months, and then they would go away, and the markets would be allowed to go back. The normal long-term interest rate in the United States is 6%. People don't remember that, but for the first 250 years of American history, it always hovered around 6%. Because of the crash of 2008 and the concept of too big to fail, which is ridiculous, that's just a bunch of payoffs to big corporations who have a lot of political clout. But okay, both parties do it. They're all guilty. We propped up these too big to fail corporations by issuing enormous amounts of debt, which is all short-term debt. And we did it at zero interest rates. Now, what's happening today is you can hold it off for a while. Do you know what country has ever been successful with 10 years of zero interest rates in the history of the world? That many. Zero. It's never been successful. Do you know how many countries have ever successfully operated using a fiat currency, which is what we have now, backed by nothing but confidence?
Right.
Zero. Okay. Now what's happening is the borrowing cost. So at zero interest rates, they kept borrowing money because they felt they could keep printing money. This is what modern monetary theory is, and I don't want to bore you, but they felt they could keep printing money, and if they keep reissuing it at near zero, it really doesn't cost anybody anything. But now that we're in an inverted yield curve, which means that people have wised up. China isn't buying our debt anymore for lots of reasons. No foreign country wants to buy our debt anymore. So who's mostly buying our debt is our own Federal Reserve, and the biggest Ponzi scheme on earth. And the borrowing costs, with interest rates where they are, it's now almost a quarter of the federal budget is just rolling over the unpaid interest. And that keeps compounding, just like if you keep borrowing on your credit cards to pay another credit card. It's exactly the same thing, only writ huge. And we're so deep into it. And all of these programs, I love listening to like right-wing Republicans talk about we have to cut government and then tell them you have to reform Social Security. And they say, no, not that. I hate to tell you this, but we have a $96 trillion unfunded Social Security and Medicare debt that we're going to have to take care of. It doesn't show up in our national debt because we put it into the trust fund, which is an accounting trick that doesn't exist. But it's 96 trillion on top of the other 33 trillion. In the history of the world, any country, in the history of the world, of all history, any country whose national debt exceeds 100% will sooner or later end up in a hyperinflation. Now, according to their phony accounting, we're at 124% of our GDP is our debt. And our real debt is almost 400% of our GDP. This is not recoverable. There's going to have to be a major reset. And when you have a major reset, which means we're basically going to have to default on the debt and start over, not just us, but globally. And that's going to cause a disaster because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. So all these other currencies like the euro and the baht and the yuan and the yen and the kroner, they're all based on how many dollars are held in the banks of the central banks of other countries. Well, once people realize that it's all a con game, and they're increasingly realizing that, the party's over. We're at a point where anything could set it off. It could happen in the war in the Middle East. I think personally, we're going to discover that China is going to be where it's going to come from. China is in a state of complete financial collapse, covered up by a corrupt government and no free press. But eventually, they're going to have to admit it. And when that happens, kiss us all goodbye, because the world supply chain goes right through China. It's unavoidable. Everybody went there, and we're all going to be sorry that we ever did.
Interesting.
I know this is very complicated financial stuff, making people's eyes roll back in their head. And, but this is going to be an arrogant thing. I started in the financial industry and understanding this back in the early 1980s. I called the crash of '86 on the head. That's the real estate crash. I called the stock market crash of '87 on the head. You can go into the files, for example, of the Tucson Citizen, a now defunct newspaper where I used to be a weekly columnist, and you'll see in February of '99, I said the dot-coms are going to bust, and they did. Mm-hmm. I saw, even though I went down because of the real estate crash, you can find videos of me back in those days telling people it's coming. Right. It's coming as sure as God made little green apples. I tried to get out of its way. It was too late, but it was coming. And I'm telling you, it's coming. And it's going to be horrible. Horrible. And what scares me is we've become so tribalized. Back in 1964, the year I picked to name the plan after, we could disagree, but we would all come together when the shit hit the fan. Today, I don't think that's necessarily true. There are an awful lot of people on every side who just absolutely hate each other, and it's because it's kind of like when at my age, I'm divorced, and in my age, when I date, when I discover a woman is bitter, I stop the date and leave because you cannot recover from bitterness. You can recover from anger, right? You can be mad at somebody and say, never mind, Jared, forget it. But if I hated you to the point of bitterness, there'd be nothing you could say or do or anybody to get me off of it. And there are so many groups in this country who hate each other with bitterness. And as religion, and I know I'm covering a lot in a short period of time, as religion has dropped and dropped and dropped among people. And by the way, I'm a secular Jew. I'm an agnostic. I never say I'm an atheist because atheists are such assholes. Atheists are always telling people who believe that they're all foolish to believe, and I just don't do that. I don't believe, but I understand I could be wrong. So I go with agnostic. But I'm the last time I was in temple was when I was bar mitzvahed. I am not a religious person, but religion was the underpinning that kept our society glued together. I'm sorry, it's true. And as the belief in religion has been plummeting, now over a third of the American people don't believe in God. What's emerged are new religions that are secular, okay? That are, for example, climate. Is the climate a real problem? Yeah. Is it a crisis? No. I read the IPCC report. In no place do they say there's an imminent climate catastrophe. Okay? No, it's just that these people don't read. So they believe every hysterical piece of propaganda they hear. Now, human beings do three things well. Okay, there are three things we can do about climate change. I meant to say, but human beings only do two of them well. The first thing we're trying to do with climate change is prevent it. When have we ever prevented anything? Anyone want to raise their hand and tell me when we as a people globally, when the human race has ever prevented a problem oncoming, ever, ever, ever? The answer is never. We don't prevent. What we do great is mitigate, okay? We know how to mitigate and we know how to invent. Those are the two things human beings do great. So, mitigate. Right now, the Dutch are in Bangladesh building dikes. We've known how to stop the ocean and hold it back for 400 years. The Dutch are 400 feet below sea level. Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands has the unique distinction. It's the 11th busiest airport in the world. It's the only airport in the world where a major naval battle was fought. It was literally underwater, but we know how. We're not going to watch the water come up to our chest and just watch it happen like some stupid movie by ex-vice presidents. We're going to do something about it. We know how to hold it back. The second thing that we know how to do is invent. We have achieved nuclear fusion recently. Now, we haven't achieved it to the point where we can produce more energy than it takes to produce it, but that's just a matter of time. Look how far we've come. And we're going to master it. And when that happens, we will have unlimited free energy forever. And it's going to happen in certainly your lifetime and probably mine. So don't sweat it, man. EVs are turning out to be stupid. You know how many times a government has successfully created a market for a new product in the history of the world? That many times. Now we're discovering that EVs are a chemical reaction. The batteries lose their range in cold weather. You can see the stories from Chicago. You have to warm them up, but you have to spend battery power to warm up the battery, which cuts the range even further. They can't be used for long hauls. The trucks are a failure. It's a disaster. The energy grid can't take it. Bush, I almost said Bush. Sorry, that was a Freudian slip. The Biden administration, out of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is, by the way, anytime the title of anything sounds Orwellian, it's bad. Okay, the Inflation Reduction Act is an Orwellian act. They've spent $7 billion so far to put in their network of electric chargers that the president promised. You know how many they've built so far?
One.
And you know how many are operating? Zero. $7 billion later. Look at the train, okay? The high-speed train in California. Perfect example of when the government tries to do something nobody's asking for. First, it was supposed to go from San Francisco to LA. Now it's going from Fresno to Bakersfield. What the? Who wants to go from Fresno to Bakersfield? When I was a kid, I used to pick tomatoes. My dad was a produce shipper. My summer job was I'd go up to Fresno and pick tomatoes with the immigrants up there. So I have a that's how I learned Spanish, by the way. And let me tell you, my friend, nobody is going to Fresno unless they have to, and nobody's going to Bakersfield. So they've spent $33 billion on a project that was supposed to cost $11 billion to build a train that isn't going to the two cities that they first designated between two places that nobody wants to go. That's what the government does.
And it's
Wise
going to
up.
take another 30 billion to finish.
They need to just bury it. Just admit that you screwed it up, knock it down, recycle the materials, and never do anything so stupid again. But of course, they'll never do that because that would be admitting that you're stupid. Right. And we elect morons.
Well, Herb, the fascinating stuff as always.
I'm sorry, Jared.
Looking forward to digging into the plan. If some of our listeners want to, follow you on Twitter, or you have any socials, we can check you out on.
Just go to the 1964plan.org and you can link up to me through there. That's the way to do it.
Awesome.
And my Substack is free. I write it 2 or 3 times a week. I have a podcast that I call I just started the podcast, brand new. It's called Man Dog Wisdom. It's because my dog Pepper is smarter than most politicians. So I usually ask her advice before I ever share it with anybody else. So anyway, check it out. It's on YouTube.
Awesome, Herb. Entertaining, awesome stuff. And I look forward to checking it out. And best of luck to you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.